Our fireside chat today is with Kunal Kapoor, Chief Executive Officer of Morningstar, and Suzanne, who I will introduce in a moment. Before assuming his current role in 2017, Kunal served as president, responsible for product development and innovation, sales and marketing, where he drove strategic prioritization across the company. Kunal joined Morningstar in 1997, fresh out of the University of Chicago Booth School with an MBA. Kunal also holds a CFA, is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Nature Conservancy of Illinois, and in 2010 was named Crane's Chicago Business School annual list of 40 under 40. Morningstar employs over 11,000 staff in Kunal. I can never keep track, and about 30 offices around the world, but please correct me. Please note that my old friend Evan Siddall, CEO of AIMCo, was scheduled to join us. However, he was taken ill yesterday and is unable to, and we certainly wish him a speedy recovery. It's our great pleasure to welcome Suzanne Akers, Chief Risk Officer for AIMCo. Suzanne, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights on today's investment environment. AIMCo is one of Canada's leading institutional investors, responsible for the investment of pensions, endowment, and government funds in the province of Alberta. AIMCo manages over $160 billion in assets and earned a 7.3% 10-year annualized rate of return. AIMCo is a proud member of the Maple 8 group of Canada's largest public sector pension funds. As Chief Risk Officer, Suzanne is responsible for investment risk and enterprise risk functions at AIMCo. Prior to joining AIMCo in 2022, she served as co-head of Franklin Templeton's Investment Risk Management Group. Suzanne holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Chemical Engineering from Princeton, an MBA from Stanford, and is a graduate of the Advanced Management Program at Harvard. Suzanne also holds a CFA designation and is a certified financial risk manager. So with those intros, please join me in welcoming Suzanne and Kunal for a very fascinating conversation.
So having come out of a kind of a smaller entity, we really needed to refocus on our corporate strategy and define that. And this corporate and strategic prioritization that you're familiar with was something that he did first. And so I came on board and joined the team. It started with client centricity. So as mentioned, we have several different types of clients. We have 15 or so different types of clients. And the first thing we had to do was set up a fiduciary management office to listen to our clients and advocate for them within the organization. And part of that journey was setting up an investment platform, evolving our investment platform to products and building blocks that they could use in their asset allocation to achieve their objectives, because their objectives, each and every one, are different. An endowment, the provincial endowment, is different than a pension, which is different than a workers' compensation plan. So Evan really focused us, all of us, and the team on the clients, the client needs, the investment platform, and then building the culture and talent within the organization to deliver on those strategic goals. So that has been, that's all been put in place in the last several years. It's an ongoing journey, but it has, I think, led to us delivering what clients expect us to deliver, because we have to understand what they're looking for. We consult with them on what we're doing so that they feel that they're having material input into what we're building, how we're going about it, how we are going out into the global markets to find opportunities that benefit their beneficiaries.
So you said there's about 15 different client segments, so that's obviously a lot to cover the landscape with. Mm-hmm. And everyone is an expert when it comes to the markets, right? Everyone's got an opinion and believes something or the other. So I'm just trying to piece together what you said with the reality that managing across 15 subsegments is quite significant. And so can you talk about how you set expectations as you talked about and how you manage them, particularly given some of the different client types that you're dealing with?
Well, it starts with the definition of what products we're delivering. And I worked in the mutual fund industry before, and a mutual fund prospectus is pretty broad in terms of what that product's going to deliver. Our product descriptions are very detailed, so that clients know what to expect in terms of the opportunities that we are searching for and how we will allocate within the product to different kinds of opportunities. And then on top of that, we had built a set of risk limits and monitoring metrics that go with each product. So again, the clients can have trust in us that we are going to stay within those limits, that we're communicating with them on those limits as well as the limits that they have in place. And so that was really the start of gaining client trust in what we're doing, is being very transparent, having lots of conversations.
Yeah. So the theme of the conference is obviously around sustainability. And it means a lot of things to a lot of people. But even when I look at our business, and we own Sustainalytics, which was founded here in Toronto, actually. And when I look at sort of the trajectory of the business, climate is sort of becoming almost larger than life when it comes to the sustainability realm. Mm. How do you think about climate? How should people here be thinking about the opportunities and the risks when it comes to building climate into a portfolio?
Well, you're right. It does include opportunities and risks. And as fiduciaries, we have to look for those opportunities to generate the returns for our clients as they, have described to us they're expecting. So we can't be ignorant of climate and risk and the impacts that it might have on different types of assets. And certainly in the risk management group, we look at that. Our clients have the whole spectrum of views on how we should go about that. And so we do tailor what we're trying to do for each client appetite in terms of the risk, but you still have to analyze the risks. You still have to decide what is relevant in different asset classes and work with those investment teams in order to try to quantify. In risk, we always try to quantify, and then communicate with clients as to what is happening. Again, transparency is key.
Is one of the reasons it's been tough for people to get aligned behind all of this is because it's difficult to prove materiality, or is it getting easier?
Oh, I think it's getting easier. And of course, different aspects of the quantification are changing as to what we quantify. We are getting better data. Yeah. Certainly, we have better data on the physical impact of climate events on assets. We have better data on emissions. It's getting better. And then you do have to take broad strokes in terms of categorizing different asset types. Sometimes you're just not going to know that much about it. And so you have to say, how much of that do I want to do versus places where we may have more opportunities in different parts of the investment spectrum. Yeah.
I feel like the insurance industry has sort of figured it out in some parts of the coastal areas, right? You look at, for example, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal last week where homeowners in Tampa Bay, if they'd bought property 15 years ago, had done very well. And suddenly they can't sell their property fast enough because they've flooded 3 times, I think, in the last 2 years, and no one will insure them, or the cost of insurance has gone up. So what's sort of the investment analogy to that in your mind? And if you're an investor, how should you be thinking about that type of risk in your portfolio?
Well, climate risk, like many of the risks that we look at, the best thing you can do is scenario analysis. And we do a lot of stress testing and scenario analysis on all types of risks, including climate. And so trying to imagine what the potential scenarios are, trying to then look at the knock-on effects. I think playing that out and having discussions across the investment teams as to what they're experiencing can give you some insights into what's around the corner.
Yeah. So we've got climate, which is a big topic and has some uncertainty. And then we've got geopolitics, everyone's favorite topic. Mm-hmm. And it's also causing, I think, a lot of noise with traditional relationships potentially, being under stress, new relationships being formed. I was at the Economic Club of Chicago yesterday, and ex-President Trump was there speaking, and he said his favorite word in the dictionary was tariffs. And the moderator said, well, that's fine, but it's a really bad message to your allies. And so you see this sort of shifting landscape when it comes to geopolitics. How are you thinking about it? Do you care? How do you think about actually building it into a portfolio risk model?
Well, geopolitics is one of those transversal risks. So we look at that in every part of our risk taxonomy, to use the risky words. But I think, so it's a combination of, again, looking across the different asset classes as to how they might be impacted, having those conversations amongst the managers, having a lot of information flow. The risks are interrelated, right? So if we start to talk about geopolitical risks, we're going to have to talk about cyber, and all of them. There are accelerators now, and so all of the relationships between these risks, again, can inform our scenario analysis. So we've done scenario analysis with our economics and research team to set up, well, if these things happen, what's the next thing? How does it affect the supply chain? How does it affect this market or that market? How does that affect our assets? How can we model that out in terms of the impact on the portfolios and do that for each client?
So as a Canadian investor, for you and for others in the room, what are the most significant risks that you're concerned about, or that the audience here should be concerned about as Canadians? And also opportunities, of course.
Well, that's it. There are opportunities. I think we all know that, we were listening to someone the other day who characterized it as the U.S. is having an identity crisis and needs to work through that. And in the meantime, we have multipolarity, impacts on supply chains, nearshoring, all of these things going on, which you all read about, I'm sure. So those are also related to a number of other risks in our environment, whether it's demographics, immigration, GDP growth. All of these things can be tied together, and we have to take a look at those. So, U.S. elections, conflict, we look at, balance of power and how that might play out over the coming years. Now, and climate. However, there are always opportunities, right? So the AI threats that we may see in cybersecurity also mean there are companies that are going to work to address that we might be able to invest in, for example. So we need to be on our toes in terms of taking all that information in and looking for signposts. That's what we do.
So does the environment and some of these risks, and opportunities, do they lead you more to kind of be a risk-on investor these days or a risk-off type of investor? How do you think about that?
We have to be risk appropriate, again, for what our clients are trying to achieve. So we're not shoot the lights out. I will say that in terms of risk on and risk off, well, first of all, we have a long time horizon. We have that wonderful advantage of having, a pretty long time horizon to invest over. The risk on, risk off changes more frequently these days, especially obviously in the public markets, but compared to conversations we might have had 5 or 10 years ago, it's less of a trend, right? We had a long trend for 20 years. Not that there weren't blips along the way. We don't have that right now. And so the risk on, risk off is changing more frequently.
How do you think about fixed income versus equities? Any big differences when you consider these different factors?
Well, they're all part of a spectrum of investments. And so depending on what's cheap or expensive at the time, what the time horizon is, what our sort of thinking forward looks like, we try to be opportunistic a bit, again, with a longer time frame.
Yeah. So you said a number of interesting things, including a reference to time horizon and the importance of time horizon. And oftentimes, traditional public companies are criticized for having the wrong time horizon, and people look to the private markets and say that's the type of environment you want to have even in a public company. And obviously, in this room, we've got several public companies that you could argue are running with private ownership in mind and that kind of model. But we're also sort of seeing a world where private and public are converging. Mm-hmm. What once used to be the purview of one part of the markets is increasingly going the other way. For example, private debt is increasingly the way to go if you look at where bank issuance is globally relative to how private debt is being issued. So how are you thinking at AIMCo about the convergence of public and private? How does it impact the portfolio, and what kinds of conclusions is it leading you down to make?
That is a really interesting question. There is always a spectrum along there. And as we see regulatory change, right, some of that is driven by regulatory change. And we saw that private debt opportunity come along a couple of years ago and increased like a lot of people did. But keeping an eye on what is driving changes there, two things come to mind: liquidity and leverage. So as we look at those different opportunities, we do need to keep in mind that liquidity is a real risk, that it may be nice to have a long time horizon, and we may be able to invest in illiquid opportunities. There are things that are more illiquid than you think they are, and when the time comes, that can be a problem. So we do a lot of contingency planning around that and a lot of analysis. And the other thing is leverage, because sometimes you cannot see the leverage that's behind. And that is something we spend a lot of time thinking about and trying to dive into the next level, because that's not so easy. So when you start moving into that less transparent part of the market, you have to think about things like that, and we do.
Do you worry, too, that some of the excitement around private instruments is coming after a period of good performance, at least up until recently, and also historically low interest rates up until a few years ago?
I do worry about that, yeah. I mean, it's hard to call the top or the bottom of anything, but it's something we have to keep an eye on. And again, that's something that our economics group or our risk teams and our investors obviously keep an eye on what's going on behind.
Are there certain, you talked about where you might use private and where you might use public. And so when you talk about appropriateness in different investor types, what's the spectrum when it comes to deploying private? Where are you most comfortable deploying it, and where are you least comfortable deploying it? And what kinds of allocations do you think are appropriate, in sort of that spectrum?
Yeah, it really depends on the obligations of the client type, and where say a pension plan is in its maturity. Obviously, those clients of ours do their own asset liability modeling generally, although we do consult with some of them on that. And so, understanding what the pending obligations are likely to be will drive us and them to a certain asset allocation. And some have higher requirements for cash than others. So that's really the context in which we have to model out what the next 5 to 10 years look like, and then allocate it.
In general, are you increasing allocations to private instruments because of the increased availability?
We have. There's a limit to that.
Yes.
But yes, in general, our clients have done that.
How do you think about some of the challenges in the public markets where there's less public debt being issued by traditional means? There's fewer companies maybe going public, or at least companies are staying private longer. How does that figure into your calculus and how you do things?
Well, we look at global markets, and so that might be happening in some parts of markets, but there are other markets where that's not the case, and maybe the opposite is true. They're opening up. So we are able to balance that through our global perspective.
And is that leading you to particular conclusions today in terms of where you might favor public or private?
I think that's an ongoing. Yeah. It's hard to make a call on that.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to bring it back to Canada as we kind of head into the final couple of minutes here. And I want to ask you, what's AIMCo most optimistic about when it comes to Canada, and how are you thinking about Canada in the context of your global investments and, positioning across your segments?
Yeah, Canada has so many opportunities. There's so much change. I think when there's no change, there are fewer opportunities. And so there's a lot of change going on across Canada, within our province, geopolitically in the world, including Canada, that creates opportunities. So technology is a space where Canada, has great advantages and resources. And that's going to, I guess I'm originally a technologist, so I always think that's going to create opportunities of some sort. So that's one. And obviously, the transition economy, I think, is going to have opportunities in every direction for Canada.
I think no conversation these days is complete without an obligatory comment about AI. So I'm going to ask you the question here. Otherwise, I'll feel like I haven't done my job, especially given your background. But AI is obviously having an impact on all kinds of industries and individuals. How does it impact AIMCo and your thinking about the future and what that might mean?
Well, I'm going to throw that question back at you and your company. So we have to look at it as, are there investments we should be making? Are there opportunities we should be, investing in? And so our investment teams are looking at that, right? And that's ongoing analysis because, again, who knows? It's kind of bleeding edge and we don't do venture capital. And then there's how do we use AI internally to identify opportunities or streamline processes, make ourselves more efficient. We're a small organization. We do big things, but we have an innovation group that works on that. And we have a strategy around what is the right model for a small organization. We don't have a lot of data, so we're not going to be analyzing our own data. It's other data that we need to analyze. And so what are the risks around that? What can that potentially bring us for a reasonable cost because our clients are paying for it? But I'm interested in your views on that for your company.
Yeah, I'm very positive on AI. Obviously, people are off different opinions, but I think the progress that can be made is pretty substantial. And I think in the context of financial services in particular, it's long sort of been believed that humans will have certain roles they'll play and technology will play certain roles because that's just the way things have been. I think what technology is going to do is going to far surpass most people's expectations. And, we have some LLMs that we've been nurturing, and you kind of see the progress with them and the way people interact with them. The comfort that all of us have with technology increasingly means even with finance and financial topics, the likelihood that more and more things aren't impacted by AI is, I think, very low. And to this day, I think somewhat underestimated by a lot of people. So
right. It might drive its own climate transition.
Yeah, it's very much a hot topic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the lunch conversation, and we'll see you around outside as well.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. I want to thank DBRS Morningstar and congratulate you on the 40th anniversary and the Toronto Global Forum for this luncheon today and this very insightful discussion with Suzanne and Kunal. My name is Julie Caron. I'm Senior Vice President at Franklin Templeton Investments, where we manage $1.6 trillion in assets around the globe. We're proud to offer world-class investment solutions across the entire investment spectrum. The discussion with Kunal and Evan today Suzanne and Kunal today illustrates how complex and dynamic capital markets have become. Everything is moving more quickly. There are more factors at play than ever, and the scope of possibilities is wider. So financial companies and asset managers like us need to have the vision and the capabilities to adapt to any given environment. This means being on the cutting edge of technology innovation, disrupting the status quo, and being more thoughtful corporate citizens. It also means having a fuller and more sophisticated understanding of how modern capital markets work. And that's why Franklin Templeton is so grateful for events like these that bring together like-minded leaders from across business and government. I hope you enjoy the event for the next couple of days, as well as make the most of the incredible networking that the event brings. Thank you, and congratulations to the organizers, and enjoy the conference.